Tempting though it was to start with a new design, free from supply chains, we felt it was the quickest way to do it. So we quickly looked across the market in the UK. Very few people make ventilators. Smiths Industries make one, a small company in Stratford-on-Avon called Braze make them, but they're manufactured in Sweden. And that was it. So we rapidly got round to Smiths, who make a paramedic device, and they were making about 30 or 40 units a week. So we sort of got behind Smiths. What can we do to help you? And we started to look at new supply chains for Smiths, greater industrialization. We started to put a plan to help Smiths super scale, and started to formulate that quite well in concert with Smiths. And while we were doing that, by the Friday of that week, I had a call from Cabinet Office, who'd clearly seen that we were a credible consortium. And then they asked us if we could get behind this other device, which was from a tiny little company called Penlon in Abingdon that make anesthesia equipment. And they decided that by configuring some of their anesthesia kit, they could make the right kind of ventilator, the one that the clinicians wanted. So against that specification, this was the one they wanted. And we were asked if we could scale it up.
So actually, I mean, that's a huge challenge already. I mean, you said that Smiths were making, what was it, 30 to 40 devices a week?
Correct,
Penlon,
yeah.
Tiny company. But actually, where we started was you've got a background in automotive. You've seen much more within the high value manufacturing catapult. Paul Pereira, GKN. So not medical devices companies. How did you know what were the skills and talents that you'd need to pull into a team so that you could scale up those small production numbers?
Well, ultimately, when we took a look at both devices, they're a piece of mechanical engineering and electrical electronics. So it's, whether it's not a car or a plane, it hasn't got quite so many parts in it, but it's it's just a complicated electromechanical device. And given that most of the people in the consortium, their day job is bringing complex electromechanical devices, cars, planes, motorsport, racing cars, we just applied our basic engineering principles to it. The thing that was missing was the whole kind of medical device standards, etc. So one of the things we did very early on is get some expertise rapidly into the team on, what's the difference between the medical ISO standards and the ones that we're all used to in aerospace and automotive. And as it happens, there was not a great deal of difference, but new things to recognize. And at that point, we made a decision to bring in some real muscle. So Siemens Healthineers, through my connections, we brought Siemens into the consortium to act as the main guide on the whole medical device piece. So we had the pace of Formula One with the McLaren and the motorsport guys. We had the solid, robust, big manufacturing muscle of Ford and Airbus and Rolls-Royce and GKN. And then we had the medical device standards, the exact requirements needed and the guide on all of that through Siemens. So, we assembled what we needed, but principally we were all confident because of our engineering delivery capability and experience that we could project manage this like any other device that we would normally work with.
And crucially, of course, all of those industries are focused on high precision engineering, which requires a very, very high level of integrity. So I could well see the link there. But actually, in most of those industries, and I'll leave Formula One to one side for a moment, if I may, it's normal for the development of a new production line. And here we were talking about developing new production lines very early on, is the matter of months, if not years of planning.
Indeed.
And we could all see that COVID was gathering pace around us. You had days, weeks, not years. So how did you get going on making sure that you could genuinely scale up production?
Okay, well, it didn't feel like we had days. It felt like we had hours. So we had a sense any hour that was wasted or not used probably could be lives lost. So it was very, very focusing from that respect. The first thing we did, having got around the Penlon device, bearing in mind that was being made, or the equivalent anesthesia kit was being made at 2 units a day. So it was tiny production. And we needed to be producing like 400 a day, so a 200 times scale up. So two things became immediately evident. We needed to super scale the supply chain. So we immediately set the task of parallel processing new supply chains at that sort of quantity. So some components, there's probably, I don't know, 380, 400 unique parts in the, including some complex electronics as a single item. So we rapidly set up new supply chains with the help of McLaren. Some parts had 4 or 5 suppliers. So that was a critical thing to get set up. And interestingly, APAPRO, this being a manufacturing summit, a profound realization of the vulnerability of the UK to supply chains, because most of this stuff wasn't made in the UK. But interestingly, a lot of it could be. So we stood up as many UK supply chains as possible to make the bits, and we were not let down at any point by those new supply chains. So there's a fantastic capability in the UK. The next thing we did, well, in parallel, was we needed to have several factories, because we couldn't build that number of ventilators in the relatively tiny facilities. So we established plans to build 7 factories across the 2 different types of ventilator, 5 just relating to the Penlon device. And we needed to do these quickly and right first time. So we used some digital tools. I mean, we talk a lot about the use of digital twins. Well, we had to have this thing properly modeled. We had to be sure it was going to be right first time. So Siemens, with help from others, ran their full digital twin program over a weekend. So 2 days, and they planned the factories out, and we were able to start to build them immediately after that. And we built the factories in 3 weeks. So incredible. And we found space. So for instance, Airbus have our AMRC facility up at Airbus in Broughton. We just literally finished putting the floor down and everything, all the wiring and everything in, ready for a big project. So we commandeered and set the factory up there, for instance, and Ford created some space in Dagenham to set a factory up there. So we just basically commandeered facilities and put them in the space of 3 weeks. I mean, quite extraordinary. And after 3 weeks, they were up and running.
It really was incredible. I remember that time very vividly. But one of the things that I remember, I can almost still feel all of this time later, is that there was so much going on. How did you make sure that it all stayed together as a project and everybody moved forward in the right way and it all stayed connected?
Well, a few key things. First of all, one underlying thing is all of the people in the central core managing this were all engineers. So we spoke a common language. And I think, as you said, we didn't know much about ventilators. In fact, we'd never seen one before. But it was a mechanical, it's a piece of engineering work and a project to deliver. So all the natural instincts kicked in, and even though we're different companies, medical device, motorsport, auto, aero, fundamentally, the new product introduction process is pretty similar. Different 3-letter acronyms, but the same process. So we immediately felt comfortable and were able to fast track key elements of that. What became very clear is we needed to put the best people working on the job. So we had a culture of no hierarchy. Rule 1, day 1 of the consortium, I remember saying it, rule 1, no egos. We're going to leave all our egos at the door and not bring them into this project. And true to form, there was never any width of seniority, big company muscle applied. And that was a really, really key success factor. And we chose the right people to do the job. So we had relatively junior engineers working alongside their CEO. And they were chosen simply because they were the right person for the job. And we simply empowered them to do the right thing, gave them necessary authority and accountability. So just basically choosing the best athlete from the available resources we had. And we had plenty of resource and no limits to offers for help. In fact, we had to be selective. We were inundated with offers for help, but it enabled us to choose the right people with the right attitude and right mindset. So those things were really important about choosing the right people.
And I think one of the things that really helped the team then to mesh was we were so clear about where we wanted to get to. You know, I opened the MTC's Industrial Transformation Conference on Monday morning, and one of the messages that I was giving in my perspectives on transformation remarks was that you need to start with a compelling vision. And I think ours was the most compelling vision you can have. Save lives by building superb ventilators very, very quickly. And by God, did that team come together. You say no ego. You know, we had people from the very, very top of the shop, the president of Ford UK, working on equal terms with people on the production line. It was astonishing. And it lent a huge amount of agility to the process, actually, thanks to the mechanisms that you put in place. Just think back, though, of course, one of the challenges that we had to address within the team was how we got through the regulatory process. We didn't want to hook people up to ventilators that were new to market and hadn't been tested. So do you want to share how we got through the regulatory process?
Yes, interesting. I mean, because it's a medical device, and medical device regulations are in place for good reason. The last thing you want to be is hooked up to a piece of equipment which doesn't work or you know, causes you a further medical problem. So they're in place for good reason, and the regulations to the device and the purpose, but also the facilities it's manufactured in. So we faced the double challenge of this being a new device, of getting regulatory approval for the physical device, including clinical trials, and then getting the facilities sorted. So let's take a look at the device first. On first inspection, getting regulatory approval of a proven device that, you know, it works in a clinical environment, everybody gives it the thumbs up. It normally takes about 9 months from that point to get it get full approval through the normal process. But working closely with the medical regulator, the MHRA, and I can't begin to tell you how open, supportive and progressive they were. And our friends at Penlon, in particularly the team there, had a very good relationship with the regulator. So the combination of us being very open and clear, the regulator being willing to support, and us doing the right thing, and of course having the backup of all of Siemens' knowledge, Siemens Healthineers with their device knowledge, we got the regulatory approval, including the clinical trials, done in 3 weeks, which was unbelievable, really.
It's almost unheard of, and I hope that it lays a new foundation for the mechanisms of regulation going forwards, because I think it was something that was completely different to anything that had been seen before. And in fact, I have been used to seeing regulatory procedures where it becomes a pitch battle. There is bad temper on both sides of the wire, and unnecessarily so. What I think the Ventilator Challenge UK consortium and the MHRA showed is that it doesn't have to be like this. It really was quite extraordinary.
Absolutely, and a significant mutual respect. Our respect for them, that the regulator, and they need to be approving things that are right, and them understanding the challenge that we face, but our best intentions to do the right thing. So, with the facilities, for instance, I mean, by first inspection, again, you look at these things and they're made of scaffolding. That's to put the facilities together quickly, but then, the clean benches and everything all met all of the standards required. Again, because we knew what was required and just implemented the plans to do that. So there was absolutely no equivalent. All of the facilities got approval before production commenced. So never at any one point did the regulator hold the process up.
And it really was an amazing operation from their side too. And obviously everything that we were doing within the team was against the same backdrop of COVID that everybody else was having to manage within their production lines and daily lives. It certainly meant that we had to do things slightly differently. Do you want to share some recollections of how we did things differently to cope with the very, very new demands of the virus itself?
Well, first of all, of course, we found ourselves amongst the first users of Zoom and Teams, and we thought that was going to be a major impediment, that we couldn't possibly pull off a project of this magnitude without physically being together. But of course, the restrictions prohibited that. So we basically, the consortium was formed, the plans were formed, everything was done on Zoom and Teams. So we actually set up, in essence, a manufacturing production empire with best part of 5,000 people, 7 factories, 24-hour working with many people we never actually physically met, which was quite extraordinary, really. As far as the workplace was concerned, we had the task of training all these people. And of course, the normal thing to do would be to get them in a classroom, talk them through the process and educate them on the process flow. And very importantly, get them to see the production itself and see how it's done and talk to the operators there, learn from them. We couldn't do any of that. So it was probably one of our biggest challenges, actually. We thought this was going to be insurmountable, but then aware that within our own catapult, we've been using a lot of virtual and augmented reality tools. So typically Microsoft HoloLens, the sort of goggles where you can have reality, or you can see reality, but then you can have virtual reality imposed on top of it. So we were able to project all of the workplace stuff going on at Penlon and indeed Smiths were able to be projected into a classroom where people with the same production assembly equipment and components could see exactly how the operators are doing it. So basically, complete remote learning done with advanced visualization tools and stuff that we'd become quite familiar with in a research environment. But then, the challenge was getting mainstream manufacturing to pick this stuff up, and it all looks a little bit high tech and gamey, sort of video gamey. But we were forced to use it because that was the only solution we had, and it was incredibly powerful and got everybody trained in time, ready to build. So again, at no point was the availability of skills an impediment to production.
And another brilliant example of how people came together to deliver a solution. I know that Microsoft were not just providers of the technology for us in that respect, but actually were huge allies in helping us to use it. We went from never having used Teams before very often to using Teams very effectively to share data, to get people into the project in the right way within a matter of hours, thanks to what Microsoft did, not just to provide the technology, but to help us use it. You mentioned in what you were saying there that people were working all the hours that God sends, 24/7 was the data flow time. Certainly, I know that in those early days, I was working in the high teens of hours a day. You were working even more than that. Certainly wasn't unusual for people to be working 18 hours a day or more. Did that change throughout the project? I mean, how did people keep going through that?
Well, I mean, certainly the core team that established the consortium and got everything up and running, I think for probably 3 or 4 weeks, it was full 7 days, 18-hour days. I mean, we would be having conversations at midnight on a Zoom call, reflecting back on the day and planning the following day, and then the emails would start to be exchanged at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning the next day. And we were surviving on adrenaline. Now, I mean, that wouldn't have been possible to keep that up for the full project duration. So inevitably, those first 4 weeks saw all the establishment, the supply chains being set up, the factories being built, processes being developed, project structure being put in place. That required, full attention. But then, of course, we started to bring production teams on board, getting them trained, and then handing over into the physical production environment with much bigger teams. So the whole thing kind of spread out, and the kind of wave of responsibility and long hours working spread out then into the more structured environment. So people were working 24 hours a day in the production environment, but no individuals as such were working those 24 hours. So, at Airbus, for instance, there was 5-shift working over a 24-hour period. So people working, that flat out working, but in a much more structured way, we're giving people the right degree of breaks and all that sort of thing. So
Indeed.
yeah.
And one of the things that I remember was some of the things that I got involved with, actually, in terms of keeping people going and making sure that, they had that compelling vision. They knew that they were working to save lives, but very often they were frankly shattered, and they had stuff going on in their home and private lives as well, sometimes with family members being lost to the virus. But we needed to keep their spirits up. And one of the things that I was fortunate enough to get involved with was pulling in some messages from voices outside of the consortium. Mm-hmm. What effect do you think that had?
Well, interesting. The stewardship of the entire enterprise, bear in mind, lots of people we hadn't met before. We were very conscious as a leadership team of team morale, and just trading on the fact that this is a compelling vision, a national emergency. That's very powerful in its own right, and that the adrenaline kicks in at that point and drives everybody on. So that was a major driving force. But we were also conscious of people's mental health, physical exhaustion. So we put a lot of things in place to help with that. And you of course, were very helpful in that respect. But also in terms of general team spirit, we asked you to go and source messages from, I don't like to say famous, but, or celebrities.
Oh, come on, Dick, they were celebs.
Many of them were, yes. So some very famous celebrities, politicians, senior figures. So I know we had top politicians. We had motor racing. We had cricket stars. We had Jules Holland, who played
my favorite,
little, I don't know, 40-second, minute-long clips, and we had one of those every day. And it was just the variety and the fact that we had people who were rooting for us, I think really helped morale in the team. But I think the really interesting thing about the morale piece and team spirit, we didn't have time to do a grand town hall event where you wheel out all the senior people and they say, this is the vision for the thing and these are our key values. And we didn't do any of that because we didn't have time. We just got on with the job and allowed people to do the right thing and empowered them to do so with this very flat structure. And it was incredible how that went viral throughout the entire enterprise. So what felt like a great feeling of working together in the sort of cool, very small central management team that met daily. When I went to see engineers at and the assembly team at, say, Dagenham, talking to people who are trying to resolve a process problem, and of course there were many problems. They were behaving in exactly the same way as we were in the management team, yet we'd never actually physically communicated. So this whole principle about doing the right thing, stripping all the nonsense and bureaucracy away and focusing only on the task with the right people, empowering them to do the right thing, it was entirely pervasive. So every area of the whole organization operated that way, simply because it was an empowering and great way of working. I mean, energizing. Yeah.
And I remember within those daily management team meetings, what a sense of agility there really was, because of course, this journey was not without its bumps in its road. There were problems. What was your recollection of the way that we set about solving the problems that came up? And do you want to share any examples?
Well, I'll just give an example. I mean, I mentioned one of them about the how do you train that many people without actually them physically being able to be together was one major challenge. And then another major challenge was in the supply chain. We had a chipset, so a microprocessor from AMD, and it was on the bill of material, and we needed lots of them, one per device. And Penlon had a small stock of 200 or 300 of them because that met their entire need for the immediate future. And we found out that this chip had gone out of production 12 years ago, and we thought that was going to kill the program, in fact. But the team from McLaren, with a sort of, well, not it was stop at nothing, will do culture, managed to find the chip mask, as in the instructions of how to make it, found fabrication facility in Israel, and working with the Cabinet Office, we got $6 million commitment from the Cabinet Office to book the slot with the Israeli fab, and we got the chips. And so what would normally be months and months and months of work was done in a matter of a very few weeks, and we were never held up for it. But extraordinary stop at nothing, and a great relationship with government, who we got to understand how critical this was, and they, you know, to be fair to them, they were fully supportive. So, but that was just one problem, and we were managing at any one point about 140 problems, and we needed to get them closed off quick. So we had an utter relentless approach to problem closure. Any constraints, we were on them like a rash. So we had fantastic open data set, so all the problems are visible to everybody. So we operated an open platform, and that meant that anybody could access what the problems were and provide support. And we were closing a problem perhaps every 22 hours. We, you know, the average time to closure. And if we hadn't had that kind of culture, we would have just been swamped with problems. So it's a relentless pursuit.
You know, I think that problem-solving approach began in the very openness of the organization. Pretty much everywhere that I've worked, there has been a hesitance about saying, I've got a problem here. You know, people don't like to admit to having problems. But one of the differences within the Ventilator Challenge UK consortium was that where people had a problem, they shouted about it. They said, we've got this problem. And that meant that energy and expertise could cluster around it to get things solved. It might have been apparently simple things like, how do you move vital supplies across borders when borders are closing? Yep. Or it might have been something as complex as getting a chip made, or making sure that you had a trolley system for a ventilator. And ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't know it, it's worth saying that the ventilators that were produced by the Ventilator Challenge UK consortium are probably the fastest in history, since they were all produced by, Dick?
McLaren, yes. So they're all mounted on the McLaren chassis.
Yeah, indeed. So a brilliant team, working with true passion and a real commitment to delivery. We don't talk about having a can-do culture. We talked about having a will-do culture, and we were damned if anything was going to get in our way. We were going to solve those problems. When you got to the end of the project, did you and the rest of that core team take a moment to reflect on what you had actually achieved?
For sure. The whole experience, I think, for many of us, you know, a lot of people who've been involved in the project say it's one of the best things they've done in their careers. And, you know,
I would say so.
A number of us said it's kind of life-changing because it's made us think so differently. So there's been quite a strong determination of having experienced that incredible empowerment, albeit in an emergency, is how can we bottle that up and use it for other challenges? And, you know, we've got the view that there are other challenges for the nation to face. And we had an emergency with COVID, but let's face it, you know, the climate change issue is another crisis, a slightly, forgive the pun, it's a slightly slower burning one, but it's nonetheless a crisis. So why can't we apply that can-do attitude where, you know, clearly the UK has been able to demonstrate its ability to do the seemingly impossible? Let's use that thinking to rise to that challenge. So, you know, some key ingredients, you know, you've got this compelling goal. You know, there's no reason why we can't put consortia of people to contribute together, create flat structures, empower people to do the right thing, work closely with government, want, you know, an open data set to encourage it all of those key things that we've just been talking about. There's absolutely no reason why those can't be applied. And I know some of my colleagues, you mentioned Ford, Graham Hoare, who's the chairman of Ford of Britain, and, you know, he's responsible for a lot of projects. He set up a project to run it that way, and with some great success, actually. And quite funny, he said that with his team, lots of engineers ask for a blank canvas. Give me a blank canvas. And when you give them a blank canvas, it can be quite scary. But they responded really well, and they managed to achieve some really extraordinary things. So it shows that the things we learned with the right leadership are entirely transportable. And I can tell you, it's an incredibly empowering and invigorating environment to work in. So even though the work's hard, the challenge is hard, if you can create that culture, it feels very special to work in it.
Well, I know that I've never been part of a project where I have seen quite so many tears shed of pride. I've shed a few of my own. I know you shed a few. It was really quite incredible. Of course, we can begin to make that transformation happen within industry. And indeed, our organisation, the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, spends its days and its nights trying to do that, working in partnership with businesses of all shapes and sizes across the country. But we also need to try and encourage a change within government. Have you been having a dialogue about how we can pull those messages into government and that different way of doing things?
Indeed, I have. And in fact, it'd be interesting to know that our relationship with Cabinet Office, which I mentioned, is very good. And it took a lot of time to build the trust up with Cabinet Office. Talking to Cabinet Office colleagues, they view it as the best experience that they've had. So it goes to show, by creating that right environment, it can work both ways. We've also had a determination to help coach politicians, in particular ministers who are involved in some of the big projects, big infrastructure projects, for instance, is to explain to them some of the things that we've learned. So we've got a few key learning points, which we've just been talking about, which we're carrying into various forums. So I've been running a masterclass with government ministers to get them to think differently about projects. Because lots of people, there's no shortage of people talking about doing things differently or learned papers about it, but very few people actually do step up and do it. And it's a very valuable group of life lessons, which, if you can explain them in simple terms, are worth learning.
Encouraging people to be the change that they want to see. Difficult gig, but if you can pull it off, it has really transformational effects. Dick, at the start of this conversation, we were reflecting on where your mind was a week ago this year. You, not too long before, announced your imminent retirement from the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. Some of us were still in tears about that. But then you picked up the mantle to really drive delivery of ventilators for the NHS in what was a quite extraordinary 2020 for you. Now your plans are back on. You are soon to leave the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. What does the next chapter hold for you? I can't imagine that you are going to be idle.
No. So I'm finishing the end of May, and we've got, well, first of all, the most important thing, retiring from the Catapult, first big job to do there is make sure you've got the right person to take over from you. And I'm delighted that we've been able to announce that Catherine Bennett, who's the head of Airbus in the UK, is taking over from me at the beginning of June. So I step back and Catapult can breathe, take a breath for a week, and then Catherine comes in. So delighted, and she's absolutely perfect for the next phase of Catapult. And very importantly, as we've just been describing, how important that relationship is with government, particularly with all the stimulus programs going on. I think she's perfect to help lead the charge with that, because of her relationship with government and the civil service is kind of second to none. So I think she's going to be perfect for that. As for me, I've got some other interests which I'm developing. I'm on the Science and Facilities Technology Council, which I really enjoy, the big science experiments. They asked me to stay on another year. I've got some other non-tech stuff, principally in the engineering space, and I'm in a number of other conversations. So I think I'm going to be quite busy, but with a determination to kind of plough 40 years worth of experience back in a positive way to enrich the UK wherever possible.
Dick, you will certainly remain my definition of what a great leader should look like. Really, the ventilator challenge was extraordinary. 20 years worth of ventilators delivered in just 12 weeks. and at a cost well below what the traditional market price was for a ventilator. I think that they were supposed to be around the £30,000 mark. I think we turned ours out at, what was it, sort of 8,500, 9,000 that
about 9,500
cost.
Yeah. So just to go to show, you think you'd lose control of cost. Well, engineering discipline, good delivery, 9.5 grand they were each.
And
incredible.
I am sure that you will bring the insight that allowed us to deliver that into all of the organizations that you work with in the next phase of Dick Elsey's great career. For now, I think, frankly, the whole nation is grateful to you for the work that you did to pull together the most extraordinary team of talents to deliver for the nation at a time of its greatest need, but also to transform perceptions of manufacturing in a way that I think will mean that our politicians in particular recognize that a great manufacturing community here in the UK is key to our long-term success and resilience as a nation. You have done so much good for this nation, and I hope every man, woman, and child recognizes it. For now, though, let me say, Dick, thank you. You are a fabulous leader. Thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us today.
Thanks, Rosa. Thank you.
Back to Daisy.
Well, Rosa and Dick, thank you so much for that really, really illuminating conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There was only one thing I wanted more of. I was desperate to know more about Dick's masterclasses that he was just talking about, that he did with those ministers in charge of big projects. Personally, I would have loved to have known who, if anyone, had ended up on the naughty step. I'm sure they all benefited from Dick's teaching wisdom. So once again, many, many thanks for that fireside chat. It really was very interesting. We have just got time now for a quick comfort break. So stretch your legs, grab a cup of tea, but do join us back here on the main stage platform for 3 o'clock. Which is when we will be hearing from Lord Adebowale, who is Chair of Social Enterprise UK, from Nick Timothy, who's now a Daily Telegraph columnist and author, formerly of 10 Downing Street, and Will Tanner, who's Director of UK Onward. The three of them are going to be talking to us about social impact and resilient communities. I think that'll be a really interesting session too. So I'll see you back here at 3 o'clock. That's right. I've got 3 minutes. If you meet him on the corner. Well, hello and welcome back. So our next session is going to be focusing on social impact and resilient communities. During this session, we'll be hearing from Lord Abawale, CBE. He's the chair of Social Enterprise UK. Also from Nick Timothy, former Number 10 Insider and now Daily Telegraph columnist and author. And finally from Will Tanner, who's the director of the think tank UK Onward. So to kick us off, I'm delighted to introduce to you Lord Abawale.
Hi everybody, it's a pleasure to be part of this summit which comes at a pivotal time for our country as we recover from the pandemic. I'm speaking to you from the offices of a company that I co-founded, Visionable, here in Kent. We're at the leading edge of visual technology in the health and care industries, and we manufacture software. We manufacture software and the visual means by which we can create a platform that moves health and social care forward. COVID-19 has made us all rethink certainties about society, the economy, and the future. One of the lessons that this pandemic has brought home is the need for a large, diverse and resilient manufacturing sector in the UK. This isn't just because the shock to global supply chains has demonstrated the value of having an adaptable domestic industrial base, although that is a lesson that all policymakers need to take on board. It's also about the economic, social and environmental challenges that we face. Traditionally, we've put social and environmental challenges in the public sector box. But the more we look at it, the more we realise that how we tackle social and environmental problems is not just about the state, it's about our businesses, our economic model, and how we create jobs and growth. In my work as Chair of Social Enterprise UK, I have seen at first hand how we can create innovative and transformational solutions for society when we blend business with social and environmental purpose. It is a model that I believe is the future of business and as relevant for manufacturing as it is for any sector of our economy. The road that we have to travel before we lock in the worst effects of climate change is running out fast. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the world has less than a decade to cut global carbon emissions in half. If any of you have got children and they're 10, we have to change the world with them and for them by the time they're 20. Think about it. This will require significant change for every part of our economy and society, a rebuilding programme akin to the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. Unfortunately, businesses so far are not meeting that challenge. According to the IPCC, UK businesses need to be cutting their carbon emissions by around 4% a year. According to the latest BIS statistics, the pace of reduction is 3%. And the pace of reductions has actually been slowing in recent years, not accelerating as it needs to do. Between 2005 and 2010, carbon emissions were falling at the pace of 4.2% a year. Since 2011, the pace of reductions has more than halved to around 2% a year. We need to think about some of this. Some of it is due to the UK being at the technological frontier of reducing carbon emissions and requires greater investment in R&D by UK businesses and the state to help keep progress. The government's decision to boost R&D investment is welcome, but we need to go further, and we also need businesses to step up and match that investment. But it's also related to our dependence on imports from the rest of the world, which are more carbon intensive, depending on dirty fuels such as coal, and using technologies which are less efficient than they could be. The fundamental truth is that if we are going to have to make, not import, our way to net zero, the UK has an opportunity to leapfrog our competitor economies around the world, to turn ourselves into a lean, clean, green manufacturing hub for the global economy. If global Britain is to mean anything, it needs to mean delivering this vision. This means a long-term commitment from government in investing in this area. It means a similar long-term commitment from business. We need to look again at our tax system, our investment and infrastructure to drive this growth in clean, green manufacturing. At the moment, I think that we have a strong commitment on paper to net zero, but we need to do more to deliver the policy environment that can turbocharge growth. We need to strengthen the brand of UK manufacturing around the world. My work with social enterprises has shown that consumers are becoming much more sophisticated about how they buy products, not just in the UK, but around the world. We have a growing global middle class that wants to buy ethically, socially, and environmentally responsible products. We have a chance to capture this global market and dominate this high-value marketplace. But we need to act quickly to associate our brand with clean, green manufacturing. Businesses and government need to work in partnership to spread the word that UK products are not only high quality, but good for the planet. Similar to the GREAT campaign that was launched by the last government. Greener manufacturing is not just an opportunity for manufacturers, but the whole country to achieve net zero and boost our competitiveness. We need to make sure that we see the transformational potential of green industries for our whole economy, not just part of it. So let's think about the future of work. COVID is accelerating structural change in the UK economy. Many of these changes have been predicted, and they are predicted to take decades. But the rapid digitisation of retail and expansion of flexible working at home, with a knock-on effects for hospitality, will see hundreds of thousands of jobs lost in the short to medium term, and will need to replace those with new opportunities. Manufacturing has a critical role to play in the UK's employment strategy. A mistake that we made in the 1990s and 2000s was swapping high productivity, well-paid and relatively secure industrial jobs with low productivity, low-paid and insecure service sector jobs. We mustn't repeat this mistake again. Creating good jobs in our manufacturing sector requires more investment, a bit more risk and a long-term vision, but the rewards are worthwhile. We need to recognise that not all jobs are equal. Manufacturing jobs are paid almost twice the rate as retail and hospitality jobs. This is critical at a time when COVID has brought home the inequalities and poverty that still blight our society. Measures of poverty are always contested, but if you look at DWP's own statistics, there were around 13 million people in absolute poverty before the pandemic. We need to address this, and the type of employment opportunities we can provide after COVID will be critical to that process. It's worth pausing for a moment to consider the sea change that has happened in the UK and around the world. When Charles Dickens published Hard Times in 1854, in the fictional Coketown, based on the mill towns of the industrial north, it was the manufacturing sector which was seen as exploitative, low paid and insecure. Retail jobs were then seen as high status and healthier than their peers. Fast forward to today, and manufacturing is now seen in the UK as the high status, healthier and better paid jobs. It's the retail distribution centres that now resemble the body crushing businesses in Dickens' Coketown. We need to ask questions. We need to ask ourselves why this change has happened. Technology has played its part, of course, but other sectors have also seen rapid digitisation, but it hasn't led to improvements for workers. Now, I believe that one of the biggest reasons for this change has been a cultural change within the manufacturing sector, which has seen value that highly skilled, motivated, engaged staff can have on the success of the business. In a highly competitive global economy, the importance of people has come to the fore. In the manufacturing sector, and this has encouraged more partnership working. Retail has been protected for many years because up until recently, it had relatively captured markets and high entry costs. Digital technology has ripped up these barriers, and digital models now threaten to overwhelm the high street. The nature of manufacturing is that it has to think longer term. You can't just up and move a manufacturing business and staff overnight. Investment timelines are longer, and this encourages a more collaborative approach. We need to inject this long-term termism into our whole economy, and this means a culture shift in UK PLC. Learning the lessons for our manufacturing businesses, going forward, we need to do as much as we can to back these businesses and sectors which have a long-term vision. Repeated evidence has found that the visionary companies, those guided with a purpose beyond making money, have returned 6 times more to shareholders than explicitly profit-driven rivals. A survey of business executives in the Harvard Business Review, The Business Case for Purpose, found that 53% of executives that said their organisations had a purpose beyond profit reported greater success with regards to innovation and transformation compared to those that said that they had no purpose beyond profit. The best manufacturing businesses display the characteristics of visionary companies, and we will need to have vision to create the jobs of the future. So let's think about skills. The fact that manufacturing sectors created better quality jobs is closely linked to the need for a highly skilled workforce. Higher skills have huge economic benefit, but they also have a strong social benefit as well. If we're going to level up skills, that has to be at the core of this agenda. Higher skilled people are likely to live longer than their peers in society, and clusters of highly skilled workers make a more positive contribution in society. These areas generally see high levels of volunteering and social participation than the rest of society. We also know that strong businesses which provide security and decent pay create stronger social bonds, which further creates positive cycles within communities. That's why the loss of manufacturing business has scarred so many communities for decades. On the positive side, if we can rebuild them, and I believe we can, then the benefit can be transformational. All this encourages us to see the skills agenda in a wider focus, not just from an economic basis. We need government to recognise the value of skills to the economy and society more broadly, as tools for social and community renewal, as well as jobs and livelihoods. We also need to look at the chicken and egg problem that has dogged the UK economy around skills. In short, one of the reasons why the UK economy is less productive is a lack of skills, and this has contributed to slower growth. But slower growth has also contributed to businesses holding back on investment in skills and development because there are concerns about future demand. This is a collective action problem which cannot be solved by any one business on its own. The skills white paper outlined by the government was useful in providing ideas for how we can increase the supply of skills into the economy, but we also need businesses to take on those opportunities. Some of this can be resolved through getting greater partnership between employers and institutions. And these partnerships need to be driven in the development of training programs. But it's also about the culture and mindset of the public and private sectors. We need to see skills as a collective change, not just something for government to solve on its own and not something that employers can resolve individually. We also need to look at our tax system. At present, if you're a big law firm taking on an Oxbridge graduate, you pay the same national insurance as if you are a manufacturer taking someone from a disadvantaged background in the northeast. We are capturing ever more data and understand more and more about the barriers that people face in the labour market, but our tax system is rooted in the 19th century. We need to join up the policy debate, not looking at skills in isolation, but looking at how we support the employers and business models which create and sustain these high-value jobs of the future. I'm confident that we can do this, but we need the government to take a totally different approach. So let's think about inclusive growth and levelling up. All this links to the discussion about inclusive growth and levelling up. Everything I've said moves us in that direction. It's important to begin with some key pillars of levelling up and inclusive growth. Firstly, we need to recognise the importance of well-funded public services, particularly health and education, to sustaining economic growth. The Prime Minister has said himself that public services are the bedrock of national productivity. If that's true, then we need to treat public services as an investment by the state in our future economic prosperity. The up and down nature of public spending just needs to stop. We need consistent, patient investment by the state in high-quality public services for all our communities, and this will provide employers in manufacturing and other sectors with the bedrock that they need. Secondly, we need to recognise that any recovery is going to help level up the country will need to be an enterprise-led recovery. This means that we need to look already, we need to look ahead, look already, look really deeply about how we encourage new businesses and support existing ones to scale up and grow. To do this, we need to break down the silos which inhibit our thinking and policies on supporting communities. The manufacturing sector has a huge role to play because it is the central pivot to many parts of our economy. We need to build partnerships between business and the state that look beyond narrow tactical considerations and look at the bigger strategic picture. The central challenge is how do we tap into the creative potential of our communities and enable them to create businesses which can trade beyond their own localities within the UK and around the world to generate the revenues needed to regenerate places. The patient long-term nature of manufacturing means that it can be a cornerstone of such a strategy, and the nature of manufacturing means that there is a far greater potential to leverage in additional resources than relying on service-based industries. For these businesses to develop and thrive, as well as stay committed to places, we will need partnerships with the state, with social enterprises and wider civil society. This is where we need an enterprising attitude to public policy, an approach that I know Nick Timothy outlines in his book, Remaking One Nation. The truth is that making no choice is a public policy choice. Without having a clear strategy for what kind of economic model we want to see in places, we're making a choice to leave it to chance. And when you leave things to chance, you cannot complain if the dice roll in a way that you don't like. Looking across to the United States, traditionally seen as the land of the laissez-faire capitalism, there is now an active discussion about how it can rebuild its industrial base, because these businesses are critical cornerstones to local economies. The Biden administration is pumping trillions into strategic industries and infrastructure because these can support a stronger American recovery. Similar large investment programs have been announced in Germany and France, and we need to make sure the UK does not fall behind. So, can we be confident? Do we have confidence in and for the future? A lot of our challenges are tied up with confidence. Confidence in our businesses, confidence in our communities, and the talents that they have. Confidence in our government's ability to pick the right solutions. I'm confident that we can make a successful recovery if we pick the pathway out of this crisis. But like you, I often think I'm far too lucky to be anything other than optimistic. I'm confident because the 100,000 social enterprises that I represent have shown that there is a way to build successful businesses which have a positive social and environmental impact on society. I'm confident because despite all the mistakes we have made, and we have made many, the UK is still the 9th largest manufacturing country in the world, and we employ 2.7 million people. There is a huge amount of creative potential at this summit, and we still lead the world in so many areas. So I'm confident because I believe in our people and our communities. I know from personal experience that when you start to look at places through the lens of what assets they have, rather than what they don't have, you start to see the potential for growth and opportunity. Funnily enough, I'm also starting to become more confident in our government. I'm confident because I think we're on a burning platform. We have to move and do things differently. Every politician across the country can see that. So I'm confident because we don't have a choice about whether we build back better or do things differently after this pandemic. We simply have to. My challenge to this summit and to the manufacturing sector as a whole is how do you make your voice heard about these issues? I think that you have a key role to play in our recovery. And you have the attributes to build a sustainable recovery that lifts up all our communities. But we need policymakers to listen, to take note. They're only going to do that if there is a collective voice from our manufacturers. I hope that you will use this summit as a chance to come together and give a clear agenda for government and the industry as a whole. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you for that, Lord Adebowale. Some really interesting points there, a call to arms at the end, and very, very nice to hear him finish on an optimistic note about what the future holds, not just for this sector, but for the country as a whole, and optimism there about the government as well. So good to hear from his position as a crossbench peer. You will have noticed that he mentioned Nick Timothy's book there in his remarks, and that's who we shall turn to now. So I'm very pleased to introduce Nick Timothy.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this exciting conference. And thank you in particular to Chris. He's an old friend and colleague who I know has worked so hard to bring together this brilliant array of speakers. Coming from Birmingham as I do, the son and grandson of men and women employed in manufacturing, I have a strong personal and emotional interest in the issues with which you're grappling today. But making the case for manufacturing isn't about bring-backery. It's not about lamenting what we've lost or pining for the industries of the past. I want to argue that manufacturing and industrial capacity, providing products and services that people want in today's world, and with a quality and at a price that means it's competitive to make them here in Britain now and in the future, are at the heart of a modern, resilient economy and a fair and strong society. Before I do so, however, I should admit that none of this is easy. We're dealing with some enormous world trends: the evolution of globalization, the increasing dominance of China, the rise of other Asian economies, the rapid development of new technologies, the prospect of applied artificial intelligence and telerobotics, deep changes in global production networks and trading patterns, and the emergence of a labour market which risks resembling a barbell, with high-skilled, high-paid workers at one end, low-skilled, low-paid workers at the other, and very few people in the middle. And we have to consider each of these things alongside some other mammoth challenges: the recovery from the pandemic, the fiscal hangover caused by the extraordinary interventions of the last year, demographic changes reducing the number of workers relative to the number of dependents, and chronic problems in Britain with low investment, poor productivity, huge geographical divides, and a lack of training and retraining opportunities. These are all enormous challenges we need to confront, but confront them we must, because the decline in British manufacturing and industrial capacity matters enormously. Looking back briefly, the rise of what academics call the industrializing six, that is China, Korea, India, Indonesia, Thailand and Poland, coincided with a dramatic reduction in Western manufacturing production. This reduction was slow before 1990, but accelerated suddenly and rapidly afterwards. Between 1990 and 2010, about a fifth of the world's manufacturing moved from the G7 to the industrializing six. This has had a dramatic effect on Western workers. A generation ago, when British technology improved and British companies became more competitive, British workers shared in the success of the company. But now, as functions like research and development and product design remain in the West, production and assembly is often completed in lower cost countries. The wealth created by the company is distributed between its shareholders, its executives, and its high-skilled designers and technicians. Lower and medium-skilled workers in Britain don't just get a smaller share in the company's success. Many are no longer employed by the company at all. And the British experience has been especially severe. The decline in our manufacturing sector began earlier than elsewhere in the West. As a share of our total economic output, manufacturing fell from 27% in 1970 and 17.4% in 1990 to 10% in 2017. Now, some of this reduction can be explained by globalization, but domestic policies have also played a role. The failure of post-war corporatism, ultra-liberal shock therapy during the 1980s, and more recently, ruinously expensive energy prices have contributed to the decline of manufacturing. And the effect on jobs has been marked. Between 1981 and 2017, the British manufacturing workforce halved. There were 5.7 million manufacturing jobs in 1981, 4.4 million in 1991, and 2.7 million in 2017. Manufacturing accounted for 16% of all jobs in 1991. Now it accounts for just 8%. And this has huge consequences for disparities between the different regions of our country, the changes we're seeing in the labour market, the downward pressure on wages, and the social crises that always follow economic crises in different towns, cities, and regions. While low-skilled and high-skilled employment has grown since the early 1990s, mid-skilled employment has fallen sharply. Mid-skilled jobs that have disappeared tend to be manual trades, such as machine operatives and skilled electrical workers, and office work. These jobs are most at risk because technology can't replace less routine, higher skilled, higher paid work, and it's less profitable to automate very routine, low skilled, low paid work. This means that while technology has rendered some jobs obsolete, it hasn't reduced overall employment. But for many people, it's changed the nature of work and the pay and job security workers can expect to enjoy. Around 1.3 million people in Britain now work in the gig economy, the equivalent of 4% of all employment. More than half of these workers are already in full-time work, but use the gig economy to supplement their income. In Britain, the effects on pay have not been straightforward. Average pay in real terms is still lower than it was before the financial crash, but the national minimum wage and the national living wage have increased the lowest wages relative to the median and eradicated the most extreme low pay. And when low-skilled European immigration fell following the vote to leave the European Union, average wage growth started to rise, albeit gently. Where hollowing out has taken place in relation to pay, it's driven by the reduced number of hours worked by men. Between 1997 and 2016, the number of men earning about the typical weekly male wage fell by 15%. The number of men earning more than twice the male median increased by 15%. And the number earning only about a third of the median increased by 70%. In my book, Remaking One Nation, which I'm afraid I must plug as a condition of the contract, I argue that we need to reject the existing ideological templates as we confront these problems. Because too often, our political debate is about the balance only between the state and the market. And too often it's been a zero-sum argument, as though one must always be in conflict with another. Now, of course, conflicts do occur. An overmighty state can undermine the market, and both the state and the market can undermine community. But in a successful society, market, state, and community can all reinforce one another. It's a partnership of three. So I want to make some suggestions about what this might mean in practice and with the subject we're discussing today in mind. We need to think again about the way globalization is working. We have to question whether our assumptions about the benefits of comparative advantage are still true. Does increased specialization to the degree that we're experiencing today still make us inexorably richer? Or does it in fact consign ever more workers to lower skilled and lower paid jobs? Despite its difficulties, we know that globalization in one form or another is here to stay. So we still need to think differently about our international competitiveness. It's an easy mistake, for example, for governments to pursue policies where the home country pays the bill, but the benefits end up elsewhere. Corporation tax cuts might reduce the taxes paid by companies on their profits, but they do little to encourage firms to manufacture goods here in Britain. Instead, we need to invest far more in people and places. We need to make the most of our world-class universities, but we also need to provide better technical and vocational education, both during school and college years and at more advanced stages. Given the pace of change caused by new technologies, we also need the resources and structures to provide adult education and training, skilling and reskilling people through their working lives. We should also have generous individual lifetime learning budgets. In the modern knowledge economy, spatial clustering is just as important. Access to knowledge and talent are what matters, so high-skilled workers and high-growth companies specialising in similar fields increasingly tend to cluster in the same places. London obviously proves this point, but cities with little for companies, investors and talented workers to cluster around find themselves struggling. Communities that once depended on a single industry have struggled to recover when the old employers have closed down or moved on. These places often lack the skilled workers, the infrastructure and the cultural capital to attract new businesses. And businesses don't want to bear the risk of being the first movers. But this doesn't mean that policymakers should simply wait for the invisible hand of the market to work its magic. Too often that hand is invisible because it isn't there. If we want our cities to succeed, and cities are the engines of growth in the modern knowledge economy, we need to help them to establish new clusters and benefit from the resulting agglomeration. The supply side reforms needed for the modern economy are different to those in the past. Yes, unnecessary regulations need to be swept away and bad regulations need to be reformed. Brexit will allow Britain to create free ports, scrap the EU's burdensome procurement rules, and escape its restrictive precautionary principle. The planning system needs to be completely overhauled. Industrial energy costs should be kept down, and taxes will need to be kept competitive. More generous capital allowances, encouraging firms to invest in plant and machinery, and allowances designed to get companies investing in human capital should be the priority. But modern supply-side reforms also require government action and spending. We need massive new investment to improve connectivity between Britain's cities and with cities internationally. We need the devolution of budgets and powers to mayors, investment in infrastructure and human capital, and an industrial strategy. Fiscal policy will need to be more generous, and the Treasury's fiscal rules will need to permit more government borrowing to fund infrastructure projects. The answer to the COVID fiscal hangover will need to be growth, not cuts, and in the long term, Britain's fiscal future will probably lie with European levels of public spending. Extra investment need not only come from the taxpayer. Capitalism is supposed to provide capital for innovators and business leaders to turn their ideas into reality, creating jobs and growing the economy. But because our tax and regulatory systems favour debt over equity finance, we're starving the economy of billions of pounds of investments. A switch in policy that treated debt and equity finance equally would unleash huge new investments for our economy and increase the resilience of British companies. If government wanted to improve regional investment, it might also recapitalise one of Britain's banks, which we should remember only survived the financial crash thanks to the taxpayer, to create a regional banking system. New technologies will change everything, and Britain needs an ambitious artificial intelligence strategy backed by billions of pounds of public and private investment. We should set a world-leading regulatory framework for digital technologies, and Brexit is a great opportunity to do that, and make as much data as possible freely available. In particular, I would say health data is very important here. And we could create an artificial intelligence institute. We should change the rules governing mergers and acquisitions so when companies are bought, the plans that are put to investors by bidders are legally binding. Defending companies should be given more time to audit the cost savings set out by hostile bidders. And the process should be changed to reflect the fact that when a company is sold, it's not only shareholders with a stake in its future, but also workers, local communities, and often the whole nation. There should be a tough new strategic interest test to save companies like AstraZeneca, which, remember, during the coalition years we almost lost from foreign takeovers. These are, I confess, big ideas, and they can't all be implemented overnight. But to achieve a big goal like the resurrection of British manufacturing, we do need big ideas. And those ideas need to come from beyond the ideology that has informed Conservatives and other political parties for the past few decades. It will take more spending and more state intervention, but this is what it takes to rebalance our economy, make our country more resilient, and make our society a fairer place for all. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I was taking so many notes there during Nick's presentation, so many proposals that he had there, and hopefully you were quite inspired by what you heard as well. Don't forget that we are going to hopefully have time for a few questions or comments or thoughts from you at the end of this session, so do feel free to pop some into the Q&A box. You know where it is, at the bottom of your screen, if you want to violently disagree or enthusiastically agree with anything that you've heard so far, either from Victor or from Nick on this really, really important subject. Okay, we're going to go to our third speaker now. I'm delighted to welcome to the virtual stage the director of the think tank UK Onward, Will Tanner. Will, over to you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. And I should start by saying thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be addressing this audience. I am a long-standing fan of what the MTC does and the wider model that it represents in terms of catapults and an industrial translation of research. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today. And I really wanted to dwell on three key points in my remarks before we have some time for Q&A. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why I think the government's levelling up agenda matters in general, not just with respect to manufacturing, but why it is important for the UK and why it's important for our policy agenda right now. Secondly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the way the government is approaching the issue, both in terms of what I think they're getting right, but also some of the things where I'd like to see further action from ministers in the coming months and years, especially as we emerge from the pandemic. And then thirdly, I wanted to talk about how manufacturing fits into that vision and talk about some of the things that we could do to support manufacturing. And I should add that it's not easy coming after Victor Adeboali or Nick Timothy, the latter of which who I worked with in government. Both are titans of this policy agenda, and so forgive me if some of the things that I say repeat some of their remarks, or at least echo some of the sentiments that they were saying just now. So firstly, why does levelling up matter? What does it mean? And first and foremost, and why should we care about it? The government's got quite a lot of slack for not defining levelling up. But to me, the challenge that levelling up is seeking to respond to is actually patently obvious and very clear. The UK has, bluntly, one of the most regionally imbalanced economies in the world. If you line up all of the OECD developed economies by the gap between their most and least productive regions, effectively their regional productivity gap, you will find that the UK is beaten by only Romania and Poland, who are both brilliant countries, but not exactly the economic competitors that we would like to be compared against. And we know, as a result of the fantastic research of academics like Philip McCann at Sheffield University and Richard Jones now at Manchester University, that regionally balanced economies grow faster. So in the sense that we are about to emerge from a deep economic recession, we are about to want to spur our economy quickly back to where it was before the pandemic and beyond in order to raise productivity and living standards. It is in our economic interests at a national level as well as a regional level to start closing the gap that has been growing for some time now between less productive and more productive regions. And that by and large means the gap between London and the southeast and the rest, with the small exception of the east of England. Why does levelling up matter? In other senses, it matters partly because some parts of our country are just simply growing much faster than others. If you look back to 2004, London was around the same size as the economy of the north of England. They were roughly equivalent. Fast forward to today, and London is about 25% bigger. That's an enormous success story. We should learn from what's happened in London, but we should also not be content with that level of divergence in a relatively short space of time. And I think some of the political volatility that we've seen in recent years with Brexit and with the falling of the Red Wall at the last election can be at least partially attributed to some of that growing economic, but also cultural divergence between places like London, large metropolitan centres, and more kind of post-industrial areas. The other reason why we should care about levelling up, and this is particular to this government, but I think it's true of other political parties too, is that levelling up is trying to address a fundamental political as well as economic challenge. So if you go to the last election, we did a lot of work around the 2019 election, and we found that in that election, not only did the Red Wall fall, but you saw a complete realignment of which parties held which seats. So the Conservative Party now holds 75% of seats in the Midlands and 2/5 of seats in the north of England. That is a drastic turnaround from where we were 15, 20 years ago, when Labour came into power in 97. And so there is now a kind of very real sense that the political battleground of this country is not kind of Surrey or marginal boroughs on the edge of London. It is the towns of the North and the Midlands. And so it is in the government's interests and in Labour's interests as well to compete in that territory and to come up with policies which are going to serve those people. So I think we are just going to see a shift towards regional growth more generally, which obviously lends itself towards manufacturing. Just one further fact for you, if you look at the seats that the Conservative Party won at the last general election, those seats actually had average earnings that were 5% below the earnings of the average Labour seat. So the Conservative Party is also now the party of poorer paid places, and that's partly as a result of some of the geographic shift that you've seen. So that's why levelling up matters. It matters for both economic and political reasons. I think the government has, with the exception of the last year where they've been focused broadly on the pandemic, but the government has tried to make headway on levelling up, and I'm broadly supportive of some of the things that they've done. You have, I think, in the Prime Minister's first speech as Prime Minister, quite a clear definition about what the government means by levelling up. It means improving the livability of places. It means improving the accountability of local government. It means improving the culture of those places, and it means improving the connectivity, not just of transport, but also of digital kind of full fibre growth, as it were, and also the connectivity and diffusion of ideas, innovation. So those are the four things the government means by levelling up, and they've done things on all of those different streams. We've had in the spending review last year quite significant funding for intracity regional transport, for example, and very significant funding for digital infrastructure, both in a rural setting and through 5G and fibre. So it does feel like on the connectivity front, the government is doing quite a lot. On livability, the government has clearly set up a number of funds, the Levelling Up Fund, the Shared Prosperity Fund, others in order to support improvements to the public realm, focused by and large on towns, but small cities as well. And I think all of that will be helpful in improving not just the economic fabric, but also some of the social fabric of those places. And we've also seen considerable work done to save some of the cultural assets that exist in many places and to invest in things like heritage and use heritage as a mechanism for regeneration. The one area where I think the government could do potentially more is around accountability, where the devolution white paper has started. There's been a debate and some political noises on the devolution white paper, but we haven't yet had kind of serious progress from government on that front. And we've also had things like the moving of departments and investing in capital infrastructure through the new National Infrastructure Bank, all of which is creating more kind of energy and capital investment around this agenda. So lots of it is kind of moving the debate forward. But I do think that there is more to do. And I think we do just need to recognise that the challenge that the government set itself with levelling up, of which I would see manufacturing as a key part, as I say, is a generational challenge. This is kind of as a result of 30, 40 years of economic change that has led to some of the divergence that we see today. If we're going to reverse that, we should be thinking about sustained action over similar timescales in order to get meaningful results. And so we are going to need some bigger policies, some bolder policies, and some more long-term policies. And I suppose my fear at the moment is that lots of the policies coming from government are perhaps not creating some of the institutional capacity at local level to drive change, and they're perhaps not addressing some of the real fundamental weaknesses in our local economies, particularly around skills and human capital, as both Victor Adebowale and Nick Timothy mentioned, but also around some of the innovation capability in those areas. We recently released a report that found that 72% of R&D intensive jobs were now located 72% of the R&D intensive jobs created in the last decade are now located in Cambridge, Oxford, and London. So there's just been a kind of concentration and aggregation of innovation and R&D intensive activity in a very small corner of the economy. And in the words of Richard Jones, the UK increasingly looks like Portugal with Singapore glued onto the bottom right-hand corner. So I think there is just much more to do on human capital, on innovation. And then the final thing where I would like to see further action from government is around the marrying of economic and social reform. So seeing levelling up and its kind of regional focus, not just as a task for investing in train stations or new roads or indeed manufacturing plants, but actually also repairing some of the ties that bind people together at a local level. And I say this because we've done lots of work in places like Grimsby and Workington and Wigan and Warrington. And the thing that comes up repeatedly is not just that there aren't good, high quality jobs, of which manufacturing can clearly provide, but there is also a kind of sense of public dilapidation. The high street is falling apart. The local civic society is perhaps not as vibrant as it once was. People don't help out. People don't give philanthropically, perhaps in the way they once did. And we definitely need to do more in that sense, because we know that societies and local places which have strong local institutions and a thriving civic society are areas that are also more prosperous, more productive. They have higher levels of patents. They have kind of stronger local economies. So I think the social and the economic go hand in hand, and I'd urge the government to do more on that front. And then I just wanted to end by talking about manufacturing specifically. I see manufacturing as filtering through all of the things that I've already said, but I think there are some very good reasons, as both Nick and Victor set out, why we should see manufacturing as central to this vision. We know that manufacturing provides not just jobs, but good, well-paid, skilled, sustainable jobs, and jobs that deliver not just economic outcomes, but deliver some of that social esteem, that pride of place, that belonging, which is perhaps missing in a largely service-led economy. So I think manufacturing delivers material benefits beyond its kind of economic material gains. And I think we should value that more as we seek to rebuild the economy post-pandemic. We also know that manufacturing businesses can be anchors for place-based economic change. And I think of things like the AMRC, the MTC, I think of Nissan in Sunderland, of Siemens in Hull. These are all examples of how manufacturing can create a kind of dynamism. It can be a centrifugal force in a place, which can generate real progress, real value for local people, and be something that they're proud of. And I really do think that the government would do well to incentivize and encourage that. I remember at the last election, I was in Workington on the Cumbrian, kind of in Cumbria, at a hustings, and about 65% of the questions were from local voters asking about the net zero economy and whether or not it was going to bring back manufacturing jobs to their area. They had Sellafield down the road, they'd lost British Steel along the way in the last few decades, and they desperately wanted some of those jobs back. And it really struck me just how valuable manufacturing is, not just as any odd job, but actually bringing a certain type of jobs that people can really relate to and people want. And I think we should also recognise that manufacturing offers jobs in the places that have perhaps lost out most over the last few decades. The parts of the country where manufacturing and industrial activity has declined, but also areas where people perhaps have not moved into city centres as much, where the town had a single or kind of small number of local employers who perhaps have scaled down operations as offshoring and globalization have taken place. And there is, I think, a very real need to give some of those places back jobs and industry that they can sustain over a long period of time and can bring real value to those places. And I think manufacturing is probably the best way to do that. And then finally, I think manufacturing offers something that Victor Adebowale referred to. It offers resilience. And in the wake of the pandemic, we have learned that just-in-time supply chains and comparative advantage do give us lots of things, but they also create fragility. And I think we will see quite a meaningful shift away from some of that kind of efficiency-led economy to one that is slightly more resilience-led, which has a greater demand on local and native manufacturing, and creates high-quality jobs and supply chains in the UK in order to respond to emergency events like the one that we've been grappling with for the last few decades, so the last few months, sorry. So that's a very quick run through some of our research and my quick thoughts on manufacturing, and delighted to answer any questions.
Will, thank you so much. Really, really interesting to hear your thoughts. And also, I think it's very refreshing to hear both you and Nick and Victor, of course, all putting this industry, very, very high up on your list of priorities. And particularly with you and Nick, as you said, have both worked at Downing Street, you do understand the motivation behind policymakers and the Conservative government, and to know that they are taking it seriously as well, I think for this audience will be music to their ears. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so I'm really sorry that we haven't got time for questions, but I certainly just want to say on behalf of everybody how much I enjoyed your presentation there and your thoughts. I'll certainly keep a beady eye on everything that your think tank is doing from now on in this area, such an important area, levelling up productivity and the manufacturing sector as well. Many, many thanks to you for joining us today. And of course, thanks to Victor and Nick as well. We're going to move on to our next keynote speaker. He is a titan of business who I've had the pleasure of working alongside at a number of occasions, and I have the greatest respect for him. His name is Lord Karen Billamoria. I'm sure he'll be a very, very familiar face to many of you. He often is on Question Time or all other TV shows, but of course, he's a working member of the House of Lords. He also is the founder of Cobra Beer, chairman of the Cobra Beer Partnership Limited. And many other things as well, business ventures. But also he's the founding chairman of the UK India Business Council. He is a former Chancellor of Thames Valley University. He was the youngest Chancellor when he was appointed that. All sorts of other businesses he's been involved with, the Booker Group now, Tesco PLC, visiting entrepreneurs at Cambridge University. I could go on, probably the one that's taking up most of his time, apart from the House of Lords and Cobra Beer at the moment, is he has also just last summer been appointed President of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI, of course. Very, very warm welcome to you as I invite you to take to the virtual stage Lord Billamoria.
Thank you very much. Can you all see me and hear me?
Yes.
You can. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Daisy. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to be with you at the National Manufacturing Summit. Delighted here to close the summit. And it's the culmination of work for the past 2 months. In fact, just earlier this week, I was addressing the Association of Schools and Colleges and talking about how important it is for businesses and schools to work together. And I remember telling them that when I was at school in India, in fact, I went to the same school that Satya Nadella, the chief executive of Microsoft, went to in Hyderabad. I remember it as an 11-year-old going on a field visit to a pencil factory. And I can picture that factory floor talking to you now, and how amazing. You fast forward, and for the past 3 decades, I've been a proud manufacturer myself of Cobra Beer, and I've been chair of the Manufacturing Commission as well. And manufacturing makes up 10% of our GDP, as you've heard many times, but in Britain, we have best of the best manufacturing. People often talk about our productivity, challenge in this country. But what is true is that our 10% of best companies are best of the best productivity in the world. So we have manufacturing excellence. And at Harvard Business School, which I'm proud to be an alumnus of through executive education, I remember in one of the sessions we were told, be confident but not arrogant, be humble, but also be ambitious, be ambitious. So if I ever boast during this speech, I'm being ambitious. And as an example of excellent manufacturing, Cobra Beer, my brand that I created and founded and which I share with my joint venture partners, Molson Coors, we've won 121 gold medals. And the vast majority of those have been for Cobra produced in the UK. So I'm very proud of our manufacturing excellence. And we, like you, I've been focused more than ever over the past year in identifying how we can become more productive, more resilient, more sustainable as we rebuild post-COVID. And it was the legendary mountaineer, George Mallory, who wrote, "How to get the best of it all. One must conquer, achieve, get to the top. One must know the end to be convinced that one can win the end. To know there's no dream that mustn't be dared." So when you have a crisis like this, a global crisis, a health crisis, an economic crisis, a demand crisis, a supply crisis that reverberates through the supply chain with the domino effects reverberating around the world, it demonstrates how these shock waves can literally reverberate around the world. But it should also make us as a nation appreciate our manufacturing sector even more. And together, we've challenged each other to imagine what the future of UK manufacturing could be, with no limits to our goals or summits we can reach, showcasing the best of the sector. And the crucial role is not just in securing the UK recovery, but also seizing the potential global prizes of the decades ahead. Because let's not forget, and too many still do, that as I've said, manufacturing represents 10% of our economy. We employ 3 million people. We outperform every other sector on exports. And most valuable of all, we are responsible for almost 70% of all business R&D. A scale of investment that means this incredibly diverse sector is transforming in front of our eyes. The landscape is shifting, shaped by the ever-growing possibilities of 3D modeling, of robotics, of machine learning, and so many other emerging technologies. So I would like you to build on all the insights that you have and the discussions you've had in recent days with fellow manufacturers, with academics, with innovators, with senior ministers, as well as the experiences and lessons of the last year, to discuss how we might together forge the UK's route out of this crisis and build a modern, competitive, and dynamic economy where our sector can thrive, creating jobs and opportunity to succeed in the decade ahead. Let me begin with where we are now. A year on from the UK's first national lockdown. I mean, I'll never forget that date, 23rd of March, 2020, when we had our first lockdown. All that uncertainty, all that ambiguity that existed. And I know how hard it has been for every one of you over the past 12 months, keeping your team, your staff, your employees safe, keeping your firms, your companies going, dealing with these global shocks that I've spoken about, the very personal impacts of the pandemic, your supply chains disrupted, production lines silent, millions of jobs and livelihoods at risk. I mean, for me at Cobra Beer, we supply 7,500 restaurants in the UK, let alone the exports to over 40 countries. And the restaurants, pubs, gastropubs we supply, our hospitality sales just came to an absolute standstill. Standstill from the 23rd of June until July. And then we opened up and we thought, wow, this is it. And then, of course, we've had 3 lockdowns. We lost 2/3 of our sales, which is what our on-trade makes up, overnight. We had to shield many of our brewery staff at Molson Coors. We had to limit the range of our products from our full range of SKUs of draft and cans and multi-bags. At one stage, we were just dependent on one SKU, that big, iconic, double-sized 620 ml bottle of Cobra Beer on the supermarket shelves. That one SKU kept my company surviving through so much of the last year. Just one SKU. And similarly, we've seen across the country how so many firms have adapted in truly extraordinary ways, whether that's rolling out long-planned digital transformation strategies in weeks, or more, enabling more people to work from home, leading to workplaces being made COVID secure, with many other sectors learning from the innovations you all have carried out with the use of perspex screens and red team, blue team shift patterns, one-way systems, social distancing, QR codes, successfully managing the risks. And my father was commissioned into the Gurkhas in India, in the Indian Army, and he rose to become Commander-in-Chief of the Central Indian Army in charge of 350,000 troops. And the Indian Military Academy, which he graduated from, the equivalent of Sandhurst, they have a motto that every cadet swears to, and I'll paraphrase it for you. The safety, honor, and welfare of your country comes always first and every time. The safety and welfare of the troops that you command comes second always and every time. And your own safety and welfare comes last always and every time. And it is how you have treated your employees, how companies have treated their employees, that will be remembered after this pandemic. It is a people come first, whether you're a manufacturing company, whether you're B2B, whether you're B2C, people come first, always and every time. And I believe, on the whole, our British companies have been amazing at the way we've treated our people in this time of crisis, with compassion and caring and empathy and putting people first. Our British manufacturers stepping up in the service of the nation, rapidly providing operations to produce hand sanitizers, manufacture essential PPE. And when the challenge came, we responded to the UK's ventilator challenge. We delivered 20 years worth of ventilators in just 12 weeks, a remarkable achievement, a valuable example of what can be achieved. What can be achieved when a sector comes together with determination and a shared purpose. And it's a powerful lesson for us to build on as we navigate the next few critical weeks and the months of this crisis. The Prime Minister, the CBI, of course, we asked, of which I'm proud to be president. And of course, the CBI is the largest business organization in the country. We speak not only for the FTSE 100, FTSE 250, of course we do, but 190,000 businesses throughout the UK, employing 7 million people. That's 1/3 of the private sector workforce. And we also have almost 200 trade associations, from the National Farmers Union to the Law Society, who are members of the CBI. And so where we're concerned, we are constantly in touch with the government. We wrote to Kwasi Kwarteng, our new business secretary, at the beginning of February, saying we need a roadmap. Government responded, and the Prime Minister roadmap out of the lockdown offers businesses a route to plan and reason for hope. Firms back the step-by-step approach with its reliance on data rather than dates. And I've spoken about this in Parliament as well as a crossbench peer. We've challenged the government: is it the data or the dates that are going to be governing the reopening of the economy? And what is the most effective way to avoid the stop-start restrictions of the past? And this includes the end of tiering, with all 4 steps applied across England at once. We also have more tools in our armory than we did just a year ago. 3 incredible vaccines developed, with more down the track. We've got the Novavax and the Johnson & Johnson hopefully coming online soon, and ever deepening business expertise on how to operate safely. And since last summer, I personally have been crying out for the availability of vast, mass, rapid, affordable lateral flow testing to be available to the country, including to business. And in November, the government finally listened. The CBI got behind it, and they answered our call. And now they've extended free workplace testing until the end of June, for which I'm very, very grateful. And this is an invaluable way to identify asymptomatic cases that would otherwise go undetected. And we will continue to work with business to feed into each of the government's 4 reviews that are taking place as the roadmap progresses: international travel, large events, COVID status certification, and social distancing, taking us from lockdown to living with COVID. But crucial, of course, we also had the budget. And before our budget, which was on the 3rd of March, India, where I'm originally from, India had their budget on the 1st of February. And the Indian government said categorically, we are not increasing taxes in its budget because businesses have suffered so much over the past year thanks to the pandemic. We don't want businesses who've suffered so much to have tax increases. Secondly, we don't want to have tax increases because we're worried that they will stifle the recovery. Well, our Indian origin Chancellor Rishi Sunak, did he listen? He did in a way. He set out a huge number of measures to ease the landing for firms. He extended the job retention scheme, a new loan recovery scheme. Fantastic. Where the rates, business rates were extended, the VAT reduction from 20% to 5% was extended. This is all fantastic to help firms to come out of this pandemic and recover. And many of these were in direct response to CBI campaigns or the result of hard-fought efforts. But there were gaps. And the Chancellor's always said he's going to go to the best efforts to help as many as he can, but not everyone has been helped. Across supply chains, for example, many suppliers who don't automatically qualify for support are still facing pressure. The excluded, the 3 million who received no support over the last year for various reasons. So turning to the recovery, the Chancellor announced innovative measures to help SMEs adopt technology and new management practices and that will drive productivity and recovery, alongside support to boost the UK's international links, level up regional economies, deliver net zero commitments, and help firms hire the people that they need. And perhaps the most headline grabbing and innovative of the schemes that he announced was the new super deduction tax incentive, where you get a 130% write-off instead of 18%. That's amazing. So for every £1 you invest, you get 25% reduction in tax. And this will act as a catalyst for firms to greenlight investment decisions, enabling more manufacturers to invest in digital and green technologies. And this is just what we need. We need to incentivize business investment, both within the UK and inward investment. The corporation tax, on the other hand, the announcement was made not to increase it now, but in 2 years' time to go in one jump from 19% to 25% in 2023. I mean, we all took a huge gasp then, and that sends a worrying signal to those planning to invest in the UK. So we hope that the business investment incentives like the super deduction will carry on into the future when this tax goes up to 25%. And what I say time and again, we've got the National Security Investment Bill going through Parliament, which I've been taking part in. And I make this point, yes, national security is paramount. Security of the citizens is the number one priority of a government. But the UK has always been the second or third largest recipient of inward investment. We must make sure that whatever happens, things like tax increases do not in any way jeopardize that inward investment. We've always been seen as a gateway to the EU. We may have left the EU, but we will always be a part of Europe, and we need to continue to be a gateway to Europe, and we need to continue to be a magnet for inward investment globally. So the CBI will be talking to businesses of every size and sector, looking at these new measures, working with the government to make sure every single decision is made with an unrelenting focus on securing the UK's competitive position globally. And that's what global Britain, staying competitive globally. So what is our priority for the next quarter? To support the country in beating this virus and getting business back to its feet, but also to look into the long term. And even before this crisis, we know so many manufacturers face challenges. This sector, our sector, makes an immense contribution to our country. And post-Brexit, it is your expertise and drive that is one of the UK's most valuable sources of competitive strength. But sadly, it's a UK superpower that continues to be taken for granted. And too often in the past, it's been neglected. And as we raise our sights as a country to the recovery, we want a better future and we need to build it. Then that perception and attitude must change. And I'm saying that I'm not looking to kickstart a debate about the merits of onshoring versus offshoring. Global supply chains work. They're here to stay. And UK manufacturing has benefited massively from them. An object lesson, if one is needed, of how countries are open to international trade and talent, grow faster, innovate more, and improve more productively with real benefits for people, including lower prices or higher wages. No, rather my point is this, that so much of the success of government's priorities for long-term economic growth and renewal, whether it's net zero or leveling up or burnishing the UK's credentials as a global leader, relies on us having a strong UK manufacturing base. And you only need to look at the actions of our international peers and competitors to reinforce their country's competitive edge in manufacturing time after time. And that's proof of that statement. And it's a lesson too the UK can take to heart. And emerging from this crisis, we have a chance to reset. In fact, it's during crises that you can actually come up with initiatives that have long-term impact. And there's no better example than in the midst of the Second World War, that horrible World War. In 1942, the Beveridge Report was commissioned. And the Beveridge Report was implemented in the years after the end of the war, after 1945, which led to the welfare state, which led to the National Health Service, which changed the history of this country. So to step back and imagine the kind of economy and society we want to return to when the pandemic is over, at the CBI, we're proposing a national economic vision, a national economic strategy, a vision for the long term, no less than a decade to 2030, co-created with business, unions, government, academia, and civil society to build a truly competitive, dynamic, and modern economy. To help inform that vision, the CBI has been working to identify what the future prizes are available to the country. And we will come forward with plans in a short time to share with you, to share with government, share with business across the country and others, setting out what these prizes mean in concrete terms to sectors and companies such as yours across the economy. And this sector, the manufacturing sector, can be a driver of inward investment and export, a catalyst for innovation, an engine for the UK's net zero revolution across the UK. And this year is a phenomenal year. It's a watershed year for the UK. We're going to be hosting G7, which also has been extended to include India, Australia, and South Korea. I will be chairing the B7, so the organizations like the CBI from around the world that I will be chairing. And we will be hosting the UN COP26 Climate Change Summit in November this year. So this is a chance for real global leadership for Britain. And I believe that there are three important steps that the UK can take to kickstart that work right now. First, so much of the UK's prosperity and progress has been built on our ability to imagine and create, tackling age-old problems with fresh insight and invention, and producing so many of the world's great innovations, the steam engine, the World Wide Web, most recently a COVID vaccine, with great universities like Oxford, working in partnership with businesses like AstraZeneca, an international company, a British-Swedish company headquartered in Cambridge, manufacturing the vaccine in 3 plants in the UK, in Oxford, in Kiel, in Wrexham, with Wockhardt, an Indian company manufacturing vaccines in Wales, collaborating with Serum Institute of India, the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world, who got a 1 billion dose contract for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, together making the vaccine for the world. It's these efforts and collaborations that are a real cause for hope. It is this spirit of creativity, ingenuity, and collaboration that we've got to sustain going forward. And that's why industry-led projects like Made Smarter are so valuable. In 2017, Jürgen Meyer, the chief executive of Siemens and a great friend of the CBI, led the commission to figure out how digital technology could transform manufacturing. And the research found that with the right funding, productivity in the manufacturing sector could grow by more than 25% over the next years, and carbon emission could fall by 4.5% in a decade. A brilliant step towards the UK's net zero target. And since then, we've seen Made Smarter's pilot in the Northwest. It started with just over 100 manufacturers across Cumbria, Lancashire, Liverpool, Manchester, Cheshire, and Warrington. They received support ranging from tech advice, workshops and leadership development to funding for digital internships. And it's worked. Those businesses increased exports and job creation. They upskilled their workforces, they lowered energy costs and reduced their carbon footprint. The program enabled one Burnley textile manufacturer to double their production capacity. double their production capacity. There are stories like this from all over the Northwest, firms using tech as a catalyst to boost growth and productivity, and overall, the pilot scheme helped add £100 million to the region's GVA. £100 million. Just imagine that money improving the lives in every corner of the UK. But we now need the funding to grow Made Smarter into a truly national program that can help businesses innovate and prosper at the very moment when we need it most. The government's £250 million Help to Grow scheme is also welcome support that can help smaller businesses access vital management training in business schools, as well as digital advice and back office software to get back on their feet, build their capacity, and boost productivity. Another crucial cog in giving our manufacturers the backing and the recognition that they deserve. Which leads me to my second point. We need a national wave of research and development. And as I said earlier, UK manufacturers are already leading the way on R&D investment. But as our response to this pandemic has reinforced throughout, we're stronger when policymakers and industry are working together in partnership. We know the government already has a target. We've been investing 1.7% in GDP in R&D and innovation. America, Germany, 2.8%, Israel, 4%. So the government had a target to increase R&D spending to 2.4% of GDP by 2027. And the CBI has campaigned for years but progress has been too slow. But if we increased it by just 1%, from 1.7% to 2.7%, if we put an extra 20 billion a year into R&D and innovation, just imagine how much more that will power our competitiveness and productivity, how much more it could benefit our society, sparking innovation in everything from clean, low carbon energy to space exploration to new medical breakthroughs. Just imagine. But we've been here before. We recognize the needs. We understand the potential. Now is the time to deliver the sustained funding and strategy to make it a reality. And by the way, this investment in R&D innovation, some of it comes from government, a lot of it comes from the private sector in the UK, but a huge amount of it comes from inward investment from abroad, which goes back to the point that I made earlier. We've got to continue to be this outward-looking, open economy and a magnet for inward investment. And finally, and perhaps the most crucial of all, we need to ensure that this sector has access to the right skills. And here we have a challenge. Even before COVID, the CBI's most recent skills report found that 9 in 10 workers will need some form of reskilling over the next 10 years if we are to keep up with the pace of technology and change. And manufacturing is no exception. Make UK, a fantastic trade association, a close partner of the CBI, released a report towards the end of last year. And that report said that 2/3 of manufacturers do not think the vocational training and for jobs landscape is keeping pace with the digital skills provision they need. The government's recent white paper, Job for Skills, is an important step forward, aiming to strengthen the relationship with local employers and providers to ensure that learning and training is developed and delivered with an eye to businesses' needs on the ground, better matching the local provision offer with the opportunities available. But the continued lack of progress in reforming the apprenticeship levy is an outstanding ask from business that could make a huge difference, transforming into a more flexible skills levy to fund high quality accredited training, to help small businesses overcome barriers to training and investment. SME tax credits should be introduced. And taken together, these 3 important moves to make in tech, research and development and innovation, and skills, the essentials of every world-class manufacturing base. And you talk to young people today, and I have four children, 2 in their 20s, 2 teenagers, and you ask children today, young people today, what are the 2 most important things to you? They will say 1, climate change and the environment, and 2, diversity and inclusion. And I'm the first ethnic minority president in the 60-year history of the CBI, and I'm proud that the CBI has led the launch of Change the Race Ratio, an initiative to champion ethnic minority participation in business across the board. So please, I urge all of you, sign up to Change the Race Ratio. We've had many of the leading companies and businesses of this country, being Deloitte, Microsoft, and Brunswick, and Aviva, loads of them who've now signed up to it. Please sign up to change the race ratio. And diversity and inclusion. Remember that diversity on its own is useless without inclusion. There's diversity and inclusion together. So let me conclude with where I began, with our eyes on the peaks that our industries can and must reach in the years to come. Another great mountaineer once said, although no one quite knows who, that there are 3 rules for every climb. It's always further than it looks, it's always taller than it looks, and it's always harder than it looks. So for all of us, the past 12 months have been some, if not the toughest times we've ever known. And the road back won't be easy. It won't be straight, it won't be quick. But when the crisis hit, the manufacturing sector stepped up and showed what it's capable of, drawing on our skills and agility to save lives, secure jobs, and serve our nation. Proving beyond doubt, day after day, that we have the expertise, we have the ingenuity, we have the determination to rise to the challenges of the day and to meet our ambitions for tomorrow. So I look forward to working with you in the months ahead, both as the president of CBI and as a proud manufacturer myself, to build the modern, competitive, and dynamic economy the UK needs to seize the growth, prosperity, and renewal that your vision and your talent and this decade can bring. And then the sky will be the limit for manufacturing. And I conclude with this message to you. At the Harvard Business School, which I attended through executive education, and I'm a proud alumnus of, one of my favorite professors, Boris Kreuzberg, sent us a paper in the middle of the pandemic about the Stockdale Paradox. And the Stockdale Paradox is about Admiral Stockdale, when he was a young officer, was taken a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War and was a prisoner of war for 7 years. And he survived when many of his colleagues sadly didn't. And when they analyzed it and found out why he survived, it came to this. He said, some of my colleagues were so optimistic, they thought, we'll be home by Christmas. Sadly, they didn't make it. The other extreme, the horror, the torture, the conditions were so awful, so terrible, that sadly, many just could not take it and did not survive. He said, with me, I knew every single day was going to be a horror and a nightmare, and I faced every day knowing that nightmare would be there, and tomorrow that nightmare would be there again, and I would have to face that reality. But I also knew, and I had the faith, that one day I would get home. So that combination of facing the horror, but having the faith in the future, that's the Stockdale Paradox, and that's what we've been living for 12 months now. Well, now the good news is, with the vaccine rollout now having hit 25 million, with therapeutics on the way, repurposed therapeutics, with mass testing now available, that light is very bright and shining brighter at the end of the tunnel. And I'm very, very optimistic about our future. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with all of you, and I wish you all the very best.
Well, Karen Bilimoria, Lord Bilimoria, thank you so very, very much for giving us your thoughts this afternoon, and to end on such an uplifting and optimistic note was really fantastic to send everyone away with a spring in their step. But before we draw today's event to a close, this summit to a close, I want to introduce back onto the main stage the MTC's CEO, Clive Hickman, who's going to give us some of his closing thoughts. Clive.
Hello everyone, and thanks to Lord Bilimoria for that extensive review. I recognise his point about the SKUs, and I'm certain that I'm going to take at least one SKU when I get home tonight, and I recommend all of you have that opportunity. Thank you all for tuning in. The last 24 hours we've heard from some really great experts, some inspirational leaders across many different sectors. All things manufacturing, about our economy, our productivity, and our catapult centres. And we've heard how our work impacts society today. We've discussed the future. And I want to thank all of the speakers for their time and for their insights. We had great ambitions for this summit. We wanted to reflect a renewed confidence in the manufacturing sector, to share best practice, information, and the latest strategic thinking. We wanted to stimulate engagement with the most up-to-date, relevant techniques and to increase competitive advantage. And we wanted to provide a national forum for discussion and for collaboration. I think we've achieved all of that. And so I would like to thank the team at MTC for delivering such a spectacular event. I know that they put in lots of hours to make this happen, long evenings, late into the night. And so my sincere thanks to all of that team for the work that they've done over the past few weeks. We're already preparing for next year's event and we're shaping the agenda, and we hope that it will be even better than this year and that we'll be able to see many of you in person. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you all next year at the NMS 2022.
Well, Clive, thank you also. I just want to say a very big thank you from me personally for having me along to help out over the last few days during this summit. And I really have enjoyed it and I've learnt an awful lot. I've always been fascinated by manufacturing and British business, but I've learnt and thoroughly enjoyed an awful lot more over the past couple of days. So thank you for inviting me along. I'd also like, as Clive did, to take this opportunity to thank all of our fantastic speakers and panelists who gave up their time. I hope you agree with me how enjoyable and interesting it has been. And of course, I would like to thank you as well. If you were one of the many, many people who sent me comments and questions that I was then able to put to some of our participants over the last couple of days. Now, if you want even more, and if you're interested in the theme of transformation, do join us for the second part of the Industrial Transformation Conference tomorrow. That kicks off at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. During that event, they'll be hosting a number of workshops across the themes of technology and innovation, supply chain resilience, SME, skills, and net zero. So if you haven't already done so, do register for the event, and you can do that on your interactive event guide that you've been using today. So that does officially bring the National Manufacturing Summit 2021 to a close. As Clive said, hopefully next time there's an event like this, we can all do it in person. But I do want to say a very big thank you to the organisers for managing to get this virtual event up and running. As Clive said, I know how much work goes on behind the scenes. So many, many thanks to all the team that put it together. So that just leaves it for me to say thank you once again. Have a great evening and goodbye.